Jesse, I can't hear you. Your mic's off.
Can you hear me, Director Grieve? Better? Okay. So the motion was to move to in camera pursuant to section 91K, which is provision of regional district services that are in their preliminary stages, or that in the view of the board could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the regional district if they were held in public.
Second.
Sorry, I'm not done the statement. I understand there is concern amongst some directors that one of the items on our in-camera agenda should be discussed in the public. And the community charter recognizes that the local governments should closely reflect on whether a matter should be discussed during a closed session. In such instances, the board can move to a closed session to consider this and determine what's appropriate. Section 91N states that a meeting may be closed to the public for consideration of whether a board meeting should be closed under a provision of this subsection or subsection 2. Given the concerns that I've heard, and I'm suggesting that the board adopt the recommendation before us with the addition of section 91N to allow us to consider the discussion at the conclusion of the open meeting. If following this consideration, the board resolves to consider the matter in public, the board shall rise from its in-camera meeting and consider the matter in an open meeting. I trust that this process will allow us to fairly and thoroughly consider this without concern of releasing information that may harm the interests of the regional district. Thank you. All in favor? And for those online, Director Grieve, you have your hand up?
No, that's fine. I think it's important that we do discuss this. And if we leave it to the end of the meeting, that would be a lot easier for all the attendees.
Yes. So at the end of the meeting, we'll go in camera. And if there is an item there that the board wishes to pull, we can do that and then rise out of in camera and discuss it at that time. Just to complete that vote, are Director Grieve and Director Arbor in favor?
In favor.
Thank you. Okay, so we're on to C, adoption of minutes. Thank you. And those are the board minutes from September 15th. Is anyone opposed to adoption of those minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we're on to Electoral Areas Service Committee from September 14th. Thank you. Anyone opposed to adoption of the Electoral Areas September 14th minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We're on to recommendation 1. Thank you. And as you can see on your screen, it's a development variance permit for Silcox. Is there any discussion? This is a vote of the areas. So I will, because we have 2 area directors on online, I'll go through the roll. Director Arbor.
In favor.
Director Grieve.
In favor.
Director Hamir. Thank you, that's carried. And we're on to recommendation 2. Thank you. And on your screen, you have development variance permit for Long. Is there any discussion? Okay, again, it's about the areas. Director Arbor.
In favor.
Director Grieve.
In favor.
Director Hamir. Thank you, it's unanimous. And we're on to recommendation 3. Thank you. And that is for a development variance permit for Holbrook and Forster. Is there any discussion? Okay, Director Arbor.
In favor.
Director Grieve.
In favor.
Director Hamir. Thank you, that's carried. And
Madam Chair, item number 4 involves the Agricultural Land Commission, and I just remove myself from the consideration of any such matters and don't sign these reports as my wife is the chair of the Land Commission. So I'll just remove myself from the meeting for this.
okay, yeah, it's that the agricultural land reserve application for a 2-lot subdivision on the property of the Island Highway be refused. Is there any discussion, Director Hamir?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to explain for the benefit of the other directors, the reasons for not moving this file forward. Our Agricultural Advisory Committee did have a look at the application, and they didn't recommend that it move forward to the Land Commission. And our regional agrologist, Jill Hatfield, also had a similar conclusion to not move this file forward. So I'll be supporting the recommendation that it not be referred to the ALC.
Thank you for that background. And Director Grieve, do you have further comment?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Traditionally, I must say that I have supported sending these applications through to the ALC because I've never seen the area directors as being the gatekeepers on these issues. When it comes to the agricultural land reserve, they move in mysterious ways. And I don't think that it's our place sometimes to do these kind of decisions at this point. We heard very eloquent argument by the property owners. And I think that it's only fair that the Agricultural Land Reserve have an opportunity to discuss this. I know that that in past there hasn't been a lot of support, but I do say that the commission has its own set of criteria and its own dogma at work here, and sometimes their rationale is strange to me. So they don't realize sometimes, in this case especially, how much this impacts farmers, especially families and succession of farming. I think that they're playing with people's life savings sometimes. So I'm going to switch my position from the EASC meeting, and I'm going to support that we send this through with no comment. So that's my position. So I will be voting against this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anything further? Okay, I'll call the question. Director Arbor,
In favor?
Director Grieve,
I'm opposed.
Director Hamir, and that's carried. We're on to recommendation 5. And the recommendation is regarding the Comox Valley Regional District Board policy, transfer of water and wastewater systems to the regional district. And this is a vote of the full board. Any questions, comments? Okay, I'll go through the list. Director Grant. Director Swift. In favor. Director Hamir. Director Grieve.
In favor.
Director Arbor.
In favor?
Director Frisch. Director Morin. Director Cole Hamilton. Director Hillian. That's unanimous. And we're on to recommendation 6. Thank you. Thanks. And this is regarding composting toilets on Hornby Island. Is there any discussion? Okay, this is a vote of the full board. Director Grant? In favor. Director Swift? In favor. Director Hamir? In favor. Director Grieve?
In favor.
Thank you. Director Arbor?
In favor?
Thank you. Director Frisch? In favor. Director Morin? In favor. Director Cole Hamilton? In favor. And Director Hillian? And that's unanimous. Thank you. And we're on to recommendation 7. Thank you. And that's for the inclusion of the Comox Valley Regional District Septic Education Program. Is there any comments, questions? Hearing and seeing none, I'll go through the list. Director Grant? In favor. Director Swift? In favor. Director Hamir? In favor. Director Arbor?
In favor.
Director Grieve?
In favor?
Director Frisch? In favor. Director Morin? In favor. Director Cole-Hamilton? In favor. Director Hillian? In favor, also unanimous. Okay, we're on to item 2, Economic Development Select Committee minutes from, thank you, from September 14th. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Hearing and seeing none, is there any opposition to receipt of the minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. So we're on to item 3, which is the Comox Valley Sewage Commission minutes of September 15th. Okay. Anyone opposed to receipt of the minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We're on to Comox Valley Water Committee minutes. Thank you. Those are for September 15th. Is there anyone opposed to the receipt of those minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We're on to Comox Valley Sports Center Commission minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone opposed to receipt of Sports Commission minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we're on to Committee of the Whole from September 17th. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Any opposition to receipt of those minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we're on to item 7. Thank you. It's the Comox Valley Regional District Residential Retrofit Market Acceleration Strategy.
Thank you, Chair and Directors. And Robin Holm, our long-range planner, is here to introduce the consultants and this project. And together they will answer any of your questions following the presentation.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Through the chair and to the directors, I'd like to present this item to you today. CVRD is one of 9 local governments on Vancouver Island working together as a part of the Transition 2050 Residential Retrofit Acceleration Project. The project is funded through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to help communities reach significant carbon emission reduction targets as set out in the BC Climate Change Accountability Act through residential energy retrofits. Transition 2050 deliverables include peer learning, strategic development, and operational implementation. Now complete, I'd like to present the CVRD Residential Retrofit Market Acceleration Strategy. Peter Sundberg from City Green Solutions will be presenting the strategy today, where he will provide an overview of the barriers our community faces when it comes to the uptake of these energy upgrade retrofits, as well as the recommended priority actions to accelerate the installation of these retrofits. The work of reducing GHG emissions is now being delivered under the RGS service. Implementing the priority actions outlined in this strategy will help the CVRD to respond to the climate crisis by meeting climate action and retrofit targets and enable collaboration with our municipal partners. Staff are recommending that the board receive the strategy as information and direct staff to proceed with implementation through the 2021-2025 financial planning process. Both Peter and I will be available for questions after the presentation.
Great, thank you. Robin, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks. So I'll just have you advance, or someone on your team advance the slides, please, and maybe to next slide. Great, so what I'm going to do in the 10 minutes I have for you today is provide a very brief introduction to the Transition 2050 project to provide you with the context of the funding. And then I'm going to do a very sort of quick summary of the Residential Retrofit Acceleration Strategy document and then be available for questions. On some of the slides, given the time limit, I'll be going through relatively quickly. But if you want to double back and speak to more of them, we can do so, and I'm available for as long as needed for questions. Next slide. So as mentioned by Robin, the funding for this whole strategy is from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So the benefit for the regional district is that none of your funds had to go into actually funding any of this work. It's come through this program, and it's being delivered by the organization I run, City Green Solutions, and we're a nonprofit based in Victoria that provides energy efficiency programs and services, and the Home Performance Stakeholder Council, which is an industry association representing retrofit contractors. So, people that do insulation, windows, heat pumps. And the goal of this project is really to bring together different government actors and industry to collaborate and identify options and opportunities for achieving residential greenhouse gas emission reductions. So we're talking about greenhouse gas emission reductions that can occur from someone installing a heat pump in their home, or insulation, or doing air sealing. And the goal of this program is to help identify options to double greenhouse gas emission reductions within the next 2 years in the region and all of the project partner regions that you see on the right of the screen there, and then help create a clear path for achieving the 2030 and 2050 targets. So the program has been very active, working with the local and regional governments noted on the side of the screen, and a lot of industry input. Next slide, please. So what's come out of it, and is, I believe, has been provided, is a regional retrofit acceleration strategy. And the key objective of this strategy, and the strategy developed for other regional districts and local governments in the program, is to identify sort of actionable strategies that can help you achieve your specific CVRD GHG emission reduction target, which is 80% reduction below 207 levels by 2050, with 50% reduction below by 2030. So pretty aggressive targets, similar to other local governments, and so there's a lot of work to be done to achieve these targets. Next slide, please. To inform this strategy, there's been a whole range of contractor engagement. So what we were really trying to do with this project is not just come up with projects that us as consultants or what local governments might think, but really talk to people who are doing the installations, the insulators, the heat pump people doing windows, heating systems, and ask them, what do they think are the barriers for them selling their products in your community and the communities up and down the island, and what do they think could really help accelerate their ability to sell more products, one, to help grow their businesses, but also to help the regions help them with their greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. We did a lot of sort of talking to those people. We also did looked at all the various strategies from your region, the housing needs assessment, the growth strategy, sustainability strategy, and tried to pull some of those elements in. We looked at your provincial greenhouse gas emissions inventory, Stats Can data about the types of housing in your region. We looked at how many contractors are actually operating in your region, and then we got input from CVRD staff along the way, and staff of other local and regional governments. Next slide, please. So part of this too is we're looking at greenhouse gas emission targets. We're looking at federal targets, because federal funds are coming towards these types of activities as provincial targets and the CVRD targets. So within the context of this report, we're trying to say, how could any of these strategies within your region help your region, the province, and the federal government achieve their respective targets? Next slide, please. And one of the key elements that we're trying to understand is what some of the barriers are. So I'm going to go very briefly into these, but we can speak further if there's any questions. Next slide. And one of the biggest ones of this is the scale of the challenge. For the CVRD, Canada, or the province of BC to achieve their targets, it is a massive undertaking. The targets are large. There hasn't been huge uptake in a lot of these programs in recent years, so it's going to have to be a fairly significant shift. In many cases, it's cheaper for homeowners not to retrofit their homes or to decarbonize their homes. Energy retrofits can be expensive. People are busy. It hasn't happened on the scale that would need to happen for the region, the province, or nationally for us to achieve these targets. There's been fairly low consumer awareness, even about the opportunities to improve the efficiency of their home or to make them low carbon homes. And in certain cases, there's been sort of low to moderate levels of contractor, acceptance and capacity to deliver to the programs. If we're going to achieve even the targets on Vancouver Island, We have a very good contractor base in Vancouver Island that does very good work, but it would have to grow significantly as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of understanding the local context, we look at a range of different pieces of information. Next slide. Maybe I'll skip to even the next slide again, because it's sort of a duplicate, please. Next slide. So what we looked at is where are the greenhouse gas emissions in residential homes created from? And you can see in the red bar, primarily this comes from oil heating. So there's a still a large amount of oil heating in the region from natural gas, wood, propane, and electricity. So what some of the target homes we looked at, obviously we would be targeting oil heated homes. Those are sometimes an easier one to approach, and there's many benefits of having homes off oil heating and onto different types of heating, so there's no oil tank leaks causing other problems. Next would be natural gas heated homes, which creates a challenge in one sense because natural gas is currently cheaper than electricity, so many people go onto it for economic reasons, so that creates its own challenges. Then there's wood heated homes. There is significant greenhouse gas emission reductions that can be achieved from upgrading wood heated homes and also addressing air quality issues in the region, which is an additional benefit. Propane is often lumped together with, has a similar GHG factor to natural gas, and so those could be targeted at the same time as natural gas homes. And then as BC Hydro is trying to do is promote the efficient electrification of electrically heated homes. So having people go off baseboards onto, for example, many ductless heat pumps, allowing them to reduce their cost, reduce the amount of electricity being used on the island so they can be providing more electricity for other types of homes. And there is significant, as noted there, greenhouse gas emission reductions that can be achieved from getting people off oil heated homes, and still quite large greenhouse gas emissions from getting people off natural gas into electrically heated homes as well. Next slide. In the region, unlike many other areas, the CVRD is actually quite lucky that the majority of the homes are single family detached, semi-detached row homes, and mobile homes. And why lucky is that there's many rebates available already for these types of homes. Many more of these homes are private dwellings that are owner occupied, which is easier to promote retrofits to. And there's very good GHG reduction potential and good technologies in terms of like insulation, heat pumps, more efficient heating systems that can help people reduce their greenhouse gas emission reductions. In other locations like City of Victoria with a lot of multi-unit buildings with renters, it's much more challenging for those communities to actually reduce their residential greenhouse gas emission reductions. So the target for these would be those single detached, semi-detached type homes that are prevalent in the region. Next slide. Looking at what would need to be achieved in the CVRD, it's been assessed that likely on a province level, 3% of homes would need to be retrofitted every single year to hit greenhouse gas emission reductions. If we were to apply that to the CVRD, that would be 770 homes retrofitted a year, achieving a good level of greenhouse gas emission reductions. So currently, we don't have the exact numbers of how many people in the region are going through it, but it's significantly less. So we would need to have a large increase in the number of homes being retrofitted. The positive for that is it offers a lot of growth opportunities and job opportunities for people within the region, and that's a benefit. We can note, given if in any given year the region wasn't achieving 3%, then in future years that a higher percentage would need to be achieved to hit targets. So getting over 1,000 homes per year, which is a significant undertaking. Next slide, please. We did also, as part of this, on all of Vancouver Island, we did, and this is still ongoing, so a work in progress, looked at the contractor capacity in the region. There's red circles on a few numbers because there would be contractors providing those types of services. They're just not in the database yet. But you see there's 48 businesses providing residential retrofit services. This is going to be updated in November of this year. But what it does say is that there is actually a pretty strong contractor capacity of businesses providing local jobs that could be involved in this type of retrofit strategy in terms of actually doing the work. Next slide. So we're looking at strategies now. I'm going to provide a very summarized version of some of the strategies that could be applied within the region. Next slide. So I'm going to go over just sort of the headings. One is obviously the regional district would want to collaborate with local governments. There's a large role for local governments within the region to play their role in terms of communicating with their residents about the opportunity and those local governments can play a role either in funding some of the programs that need to be done and or just communicating with their residents about participating in provincial and utility type programs. So one of the key strategies is for the regional district to collaborate with the member municipalities to have them involved in this process. The second is to establish a baseline to know where you're at. Where are you in 2020? How many region retrofits are happening within the region? And then establish an annual retrofit tracking framework, and a framework has been proposed so you can track and know how the region is doing in terms of number of retrofits and greenhouse gas emissions and energy savings coming from those retrofits. There's also a huge role for the region and local governments to play in retrofit rebate promotions. Starting on October 1st, for example, utilities and province are doubling the number of rebates that are available to residents. So that means people installing windows will be able to get double the rebates available as in September. For heat pumps, people going off natural gas oil to heat pumps will be $6,000 available. So there's significant dollars available for doing all types of retrofits. And part of the role for that is just bringing that information to people so they can find out about it. Many people don't retrofit because they don't know the funds that are available to do it. So there's a large role for local actors in the region just to spread the word. The other just is consumer engagement about low carbon market transformation, about the importance, linking people to the climate emergencies that have been declared, to the actionable role for them to improve the efficiency of their home and reduce their GHG footprint of their home. Many people do not associate so much in terms of their house and how much greenhouse gases is produced, and there's a role to be played in consumer engagement there. There's also potential for the CVRD to link this residential retrofit strategy or housing needs assessment by looking at how retrofits with homes can also be linked with making more rental housing, whether it be people retrofitting their homes for in-law suites or rental suites and making their homes more energy efficient at the same time. And there's a range of opportunities in the strategy that are identified. And then there's also been a lot of talk at the provincial level about transition of homes towards climate ready building stock. So that might be homes that are more able and capable of dealing with more heat. So maybe having cooling and or having types of heating systems that are able to, for example, filter and remove wildfire smoke from their homes. So homes that have better air filtration systems are better for people with respiratory issues, and we're having more and more wildfires in the region or in the province. Others is looking at options for to enhance incentives. So while there's very rich incentives right now with the double incentives provided by the utilities and the province, there may be rules in the future for the region to top up specific incentives as they're currently doing with the oil to heat pump program. So this would be something to monitor in the future to see if there's a need to look at gaps to top up incentives. A key element also in the strategy is education, looking for opportunities, for example, to link to your wood smoke reduction program and link this to greenhouse gas emission reduction and the incentives, making sure that as many people within the region are aware of the programs and have opportunities to access them. In terms of accessing them, another one is financing. Obviously, there are financial barriers at the individual household level to doing retrofits. There are new financing programs being introduced by the province utilities and potentially at the federal level, and connecting residents in your region with those financing options is another way for you to achieve your greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. As is being done in the capital region, they're starting to implement a range of different community retrofit programs, and there's a range of types of programs that could be implemented, sort of that locally designed to meet local needs, and working with local industry to put together a community or regional retrofit program that takes the provincial and utility programs and wraps many of the other strategy items that have been identified above, the education incentives, retrofit rebate promotions, into a larger type program that has a distinct design and implementation established specifically for your regional district. And then the last one is advocacy. And advocacy, we mean this in the sense that the CVRD is not going to be able to do this alone. So there's a role for the CVRD board and member municipalities to advocate to the province and the federal government to support the initiatives that you're doing to make sure that there's sufficient funding, sufficient types of training for local contractors, and all the other pieces that need to happen. As we're seeing in the capital region and Metro Vancouver region, there's been a lot of sort of advocacy requests coming from them to various levels of government to support their initiatives that they're implementing, to make sure that there's sufficient funding and capacity in the region to implement their strategies. So that's the very high level overview of what is included within the strategy. Of course, in the written document, there's many more pieces of information and details on each of these elements. But if there's any specific questions more generally or comments, I'm more than happy to provide responses to those.
Great, thank you, Peter. And yes, I do think we have a question starting with Director Arbour.
Thank you, Peter. That was an excellent presentation and report. And I'm really glad to see this work done. We know that, you know, other than we spend a bit of time on transportation, but this is the other giant in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And we do know we have an old stock. A little bit of feedback from me. And what I love is you've given us a target. You know, I love that you know, that 770 homes in the district. Well, let's take that as a goal for ourselves. And how do we organize around that? That's I like it when we get to tangible numbers rather than just kind of wishy-washy kind of goals off into the distance. I think that will really help ground our discussions around strategies and actions that we can take. I have to say it's a tough world out there in terms of house retrofits. I myself live in an older home. And you are right to point out that for a lot of people, they do not see the economic benefit to invest. And that's a major barrier to adoption. It does remain a major barrier. I remember a few years ago, even when some of those incentive programs were there, I was looking at reinstallation. But, you know, they changed the criteria of the program that then you had to hire a contractor. For a while, they would let individuals do it themselves. So at the end of the day, it was actually more expensive for me to go out to market and hire somebody and take the rebate. So I ended up not taking the rebate and I ended up doing myself. So sometimes it's funny how rebates work.
Yeah.
Another side of the coin is, I think one major issue we have to deal with that we should advocate strongly at the province, and I don't know if you have comments on that, is I find that the, you know, one of your slides show how hydro has such a better return on investment in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But we have sort of a punitive system in hydro. And I heard that from constituents of mine as well. So for example, people moving to electric cars, trying to move to electric heat, but the hydro has the two-step process, right? Because they really favor conservation. And so it's punitive. The more hydro you use, even though you're displacing natural gas or wood heat or other higher carbon emitting sources, not only is hydro expensive to begin with, but then gets even more expensive. So I think it would be nice to see the province, BC Hydro, realize that investment in our clean energy, green energy capacity, as they did for a number of years, is an important part of the mix to get people to transition to those sources of energy as well on an economic basis. But overall, I love the roadmap. I love the work you're doing. I'm glad you're engaging with all our contractors in the Valley, and I just want to thank you for that.
Great, thank you. And just a couple notes. I do know the province is looking at the two-tier system and potentially that may be going away. Again, that is being looked at. I don't know if that's going to happen. I've long been an advocate myself for people doing within these programs do-it-yourself, particularly in rural areas. A lot of handy people that are very capable, and that could be something, even though that it's not in part of provincial or utility rebate programs, that there's not saying that there couldn't be some sort of initiative for do-it-yourself installation in the region as well. You know, there can be challenges with people doing it yourself and not doing it well and creating issues, but it is something to be explored. And then the second, people not realizing, one of the things we've really been trying to highlight a lot more is that just really the full benefits of people improving the efficiency of their home. It's not all about cost savings, as many people are not actually motivated by some cheaper energy bill, but it's more like about having, you know, a home that's, you know, doesn't get too hot in the summer and they can sleep, and they're realizing that is their actually biggest pain. They hate it when their house is too hot, and if they would pay more for that when they start realizing that a well-insulated home is also going to be a cooler home and a warmer home, or a home that's quieter if they live near a highway. By insulating their home, putting windows on, their main grief might be, I live closer to a highway and I hear noise. So part of what the education of people too is looking at, like, what's the full value of improving the efficiency of your home and reducing your time, and many of those are other consumer needs or wants. When they understand the full value of it, they are more willing to invest, and when they understand the sort of life improving benefits of having a more energy efficient home, which might not just be about energy savings or about being climate friendly if they're not specifically motivated by that. So thank you for your points.
Okay, we still have a long list of questions here. So Director Khmer.
Thanks, Chair. And thank you for your report, Peter. I also really appreciated the extensive data that was there. So a lot of work put in by you and by staff, so appreciation for that. So my first question, I think, is just mostly to our staff. There was some great GHG data that was presented in the report. And I know that we are working on a dashboard of these types of numbers to track how we're doing on sustainability levels. So how is our dashboard going to be sort of updated? What's the interface between reports like this and that dashboard? I don't know, Robin, if you can, I see Alana here maybe. Yeah.
Through the chair to the directors, thank you, Director Khmer. I think, one of the things we've talked about is the value of the dashboard as a tool, and then the other piece is having the data to actually populate the dashboard. So in this instance, you're right, we've gotten a lot of really valuable data from this strategy, and so we would use this data to populate the dashboard once it's up and going. At the strategic plan session, you might recall there was some discussion about really focusing that dashboard around the 8 goals in the regional growth strategy, but also taking opportunity to build in some of the indicators that we have in our sustainability strategy, because there are some really good, good metrics in that piece that we would want to populate as well.
Yeah, and while you're still here, my second question was around this information, and Peter mentioned our airshed roundtable, and that some of this information is also going to be really vital for them knowledge-wise and just strategy-wise. So will this information be presented to them, or how? Will Peter make a similar presentation, or will you just provide the report?
Through the chair to the directors, we haven't really talked about what Peter's next piece would be for us in using this data and promoting it, but I certainly, hearing your appreciation for the presentation, I think there's a lot of value in having Peter help us out with a bit of that roadshow, including to our municipal partners and municipal staff. As far as the airshed roundtable, you'll remember that we have a steering committee and then the broader roundtable. So at minimum, there would be the presentation to the steering committee, and then because of the framework that we've adopted for how information moves to the roundtable, we'll brainstorm with the steering committee about which pieces and how best to convey this out to the roundtable and then to the broader public.
Yeah, I would highly recommend. I think Peter did a great job of distilling the report. I mean, it's fairly dense. So if he can and is able to present to that, at least to the the core group, that would be fantastic. My last question is actually for Peter. I'm looking at the numbers of contractors and then the numbers of homes per year that we have to retrofit. And I'm seeing a bit of a disconnect with like 48 in total. Do you have an idea of how many contractors we would need in the Valley to enable us to do 770 homes per year?
Yeah, and just on your first question, I mean, I'm happy to also present on other pieces of this and more specific on, wood smoke type things. There's elements we can drill down right to that. And on that, just another related point, the province is going to be coming out with an additional wood fuel to heat pump rebate starting very soon as well too. So there will be more incentives in the market for that coming this fall. On the question of contractors, I mean, I think there's quite a good contract work. Our database isn't necessarily totally complete yet either. It does not include, for example, general renovators that could provide energy retrofit services and do. I mean, people, when they retrofit someone's basement, they also put in insulation, for example. So we're working on trying to flesh out the rest of those. It's just a little bit more challenging to determine which renovator also does, you know, some focus just on kitchens, for example, where others might, you know, do insulation, to determine that. So we're working on filling that out this fall. So by the end of the fall, we'll have a more comprehensive piece of information. The other complicating factor is those in your region also service other regions, like they travel up and down. So, you know, if there was growth, they, you know, how available are they specifically in Comox, for example? It's a little bit hard to tell that. But I think the opportunity here is if industry is getting the right signals that there's growth for this in the region, and there's going to be more demand in the province, and others are going to be, utilities are going to be supporting them. Many of them are very keen and open to growing their businesses and hiring new people. So the key component for this, I think industry needs to be sort of informed about where the region and province and utilities are going, so that they can prepare themselves, train people, and hire on, and, you know, hopefully and ideally create a new sort of green workforce in the region of people that are able to help achieve this target. And that is a big task, communicating that and providing them with reliable information so they are training up for jobs that will be there in the future. So more work needs to be done on that. And our program partner, the Home Performance Stakeholder Council, which is an industry association, is very involved in that as well. So we're trying to get more and better information on that, so we can really know if there's enough contractors. But having 48 in your region and 700, just about 800 retrofits needed isn't a bad number, because, you know, contractors can do a lot of jobs, installation jobs, in a year, for example. If they were working to full capacity, and we're working to determine, you know, how many jobs could a given installation company do in a year.
Well, I'm wondering, since we have, you know, a fantastic resource in North Island College and the trades, you know, section there, if there is a way that we can sort of facilitate that signaling to the industry by presenting, like, obviously I'm going to be in favor of actioning this report. And if the board, you know, sees this wanting to move forward, what role could, how could we bring the college in to show them that there is this demand, you know, that from this board, and moving forward, we need to have, obviously, the tradespeople trained to do this type of work. What is it, just a presentation to, like, the VPs, or how do staff have an idea of, like, how the college could be brought into helping us action this?
Through the chair to the directors. We're excited to hear you say that, Director Hamir, because we share the enthusiasm for the data and the recommendations that are in here. And some of the fruit really is very low hanging. So part of our recommendation today is to come back to you. We say through the financial planning process, but we're lining up a report for October to do some of these pieces, or to recommend you do some of these pieces to outline what that could look like. So note your interest in looking at that program, and, as Peter says, how we can help support or send the signal to industry that we're keen to green our workforce and fill some of this demand.
And just as an aside to that, I know the Home Performance Stakeholder Council on other projects is working with utilities and province on developing different types of training for insulators and heat pumps that could be delivered through local actors. So there's a lot happening on this, as I think many people have realized that industry capacity is the key, or one of the keys, to making a strategy like this work. We need people to actually do the work, put the insulation in, do the heat pump, do the windows. So as part of this, we'll be trying to provide an overview of the other things that are happening that could, you know, come to the region as well to help on that particular topic of training.
Thanks. Director Grieve, do you have a question?
Just a quick comment. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Peter, for this great report. I'm going to build on what Director Arbour has said. I come from a background 25 years in building supply and hardware. And I can tell you that at one time, things like window caulking, door weather stripping, and even bats of insulation were PST exempt. The Boffins in Victoria decided in their infinite wisdom that they needed that income for some reason. And I think that it's the little steps that count. This is all macro stuff, but the micro stuff works too. If all you have to do is walk around your house during a southeaster with a candle, go up to your windows and your doors, and you'll see how much air is coming in. They don't have to have an engineering degree to put caulking around a window or weather strip on your doors. So let's not forget about the little do-it-yourself stuff that we can do as well, because that goes a long way in achieving these goals. And I do question the sincerity of the provincial government when they talk the talk, but they at a little lower level, do-it-yourselfers kind of get shafted. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm fully supportive, and one of the action items that could come out of a strategy like this would be to promote the do-it-yourself options, as there are a lot, like, and for example, we are doing some training, sort of like online virtual trainings that we're going to be doing on how to do that. Like, lots of people know how to do it. They don't need to have time caulking, but some people don't. And there is options to help support people to want to do it yourself as well, in terms of just saying, where are the best locations to, do air sealing in your home, not always the ones that are most obvious. So there's all kinds of resources and things that could come along in the education strategy option in terms of enabling people, whether it be with information and or types of incentives and or linking them to local stores that sell these products, or and to help them do those types of things. So I fully agree, and I think air sealing is one of the most lost and fundamental type of retrofit opportunities that we should be much more promoting, and it's kind of lost in the current programs. So thank you, good point for sure.
Thank you, Director Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to Peter and Robin and the rest of the staff. I'm a little bit giddy because, of course, I've been thinking about this business for 15 years, but I actually kind of figured there wasn't any money in it, and I watched lots of friends go in and out of the business. I think City Green was even one of their employers. Some of the questions I have is on page 28, it outlines some federal context, and it mentions some loans and stuff. Is this a reality, or is this something that we're hoping to see presented in the future?
Yeah, well, there's definitely already a new financing offer available through the province, so in various types of things, and the federal government may be coming out with a type of loan program, but that's to be determined. There were a few details in the throne speech last week, but in their initial, they said they were going to come out with a federal level loan as well too. So there is quite a good level of incentives, and new financing has just been introduced a couple months ago. So these are types of things that can be packaged and brought. Again, most consumers don't know about them yet. The utility and provincial promotion of it, doesn't necessarily reach into every community. So this is one of the huge roles, as noted before, is I think local and regional governments have all kinds of mechanisms to be able to communicate with their residents, whether it be, through water bills or what have you. What is the best way to bring information about these types of things that is locally appropriate, affordable, and is going to get the message there. So that's whether you mention loans or various things too. Part of the nut to crack is how to get people to learn about it, and then I guess a little bit too how to motivate them to then decide, once they know there's a loan or financing, that why should they do this. Is the other big part. So I'm glad you're giddy about it. I am too. It does seem like more things are, there's been more synergies of things coming together recently, with more impact on this, and having the FCM support us to help work with your and pay us rather than us having to go to you. This is another good sign that there's more synergies happening. There's helping us move things forward collectively.
Right, and seeing these the numbers and that we'd have to reach the goals that you've outlined here, and looking at the grants that are available BC wide, do those two numbers match? Like, are there enough grants to facilitate 770 homes in our region and subsequently in other regions in BC?
Well, I think to achieve the full 30,000 a year that would need to be achieved in BC, I'm not sure if there's funds for that yet. But that's one of the things is, I think the programs aren't yet at fully prescribed, so they're trying to grow it, and I think there will be more funds available. At a certain point, this is one of the messages to local residents is that there's funds available now. It's a good time to act. The one to the federal and provincial levels is that we've got our work cut out for us for the next 20 years. This is every year, this many homes every year, for a very long time. So if there wasn't incentives, what's going to motivate people to move forward? I'm not sure if it is going to be incentives. I don't pretend that incentives are the only solution. But while we have them now, it's good to kickstart the economy, start, help businesses grow so they can start doing this while they're available.
Yeah, I actually happen to think that incentives probably are a good way to go for retrofitting. Another question I had was about how to access these funds. In the past, I know you would have a representative from a company like yours come and assess the house and outline some of the opportunities. Is that same now to access the funding, or can homeowners do it?
Well, homeowners can't unfortunately do the retrofits on their own. They can't put insulation in, but they can just contact a local insulator or heat pump contractor and do it directly. So if they know there's the opportunity there, they can go directly to a contractor to do it. So they don't have to go through an energy assessment. Energy assessments have their value, but it doesn't need to be used every single time. That's the way the programs are currently structured. So the part of it is, and there's a range of other ways, and some of this are identified in the strategy, is how do we get people to understand what their opportunities to improve their home are. Some people that are handy and have worked in the industry kind of would know, others don't. And then the question is, how do we engage them? There's a range of different ways to engage them. And that we've presented a few within the strategy, and more are being developed.
And a question about the GHG emissions by fuel type, and that was on a region scale. You highlighted that oil is quite high. Is that because there are lots of oil units, or is it because they just happen to be higher per thermal unit than other fuel types?
Oh, I would say it's both.
Okay.
So it's definitely oil is the most GHG intensive fuel. And, it's also expensive. And it also has the unfortunate, if it does leak, an oil tank leaks on someone's thing, then it has the environmental impacts of local watersheds, and their homeowners insurance likely won't be covering it. So we've had some very unfortunate incidents in the capital region of people having oil tank leaks and having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for remediation. Most people don't know that. And at the very least, we're wanting them to know that protect yourself, make sure you're checking your tank and doing all you can do to protect and make sure there's not a leak if you're not going to remove it, just so you're covered. And then, it is a wise, obviously, to switch it whenever someone's financially able.
Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Director Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thanks, Peter. This was just a fantastic presentation. I think it'd be great for our Airshed working group to hear from you as well. And it seems that we're focusing a lot on financing. That's really a key barrier for a lot of people. And I think some of the granted incentive programs can be great, but they come in, they come out, and they're here for a while. It's kind of like the McGrid, they'll occasionally come back and you've missed them. I think we need something probably that's more constant and reliable. And one of the things I noticed that you referred to was PACE financing. And last week, you might know the province announced a pilot program in that, which ideally, if there was enabling legislation, you'd have a province-wide program that was available. And I mentioned that because I'm in the steering committee at PACE BC, and we've been putting together enabling legislation. One of the things that the legislation we're drafting is put together speaks of is the contractor aspect, and I hadn't quite appreciated there was such a shortage of ready contractors. And this the enabling legislation speaks of a certification program, so one would have a database of people who are qualified to do the work in a given area. Besides trying to, I think, had notes similar to Director Humir's that getting more people trained through trades programs would be a great idea. Do you have any other suggestions on increasing the contractor capacity if we manage to get sort of adequate financing in place?
Well, I mean, you did mention the sort of rebate programs coming and going, and that has, from contractors we talked to, has had a very big impact on their ability to sort of grow their businesses. If they can sort of see into the future and they can realize training is very expensive, so that many of them are hesitant to train up and then lose staff and go through the roller coaster ride. So generally what we're hoping is an organization that types of strategies like this, provincial commitments, do come true, that we know it's in the longer term, so that industry is able to, one, We know many that are just would self-invest in training if they knew there was going to be business opportunities. At the same time, there is a lot of training being developed at helping them, like best practices and training that's coming there. So part of it is, I think, and even just hearing from a regional districts like yourself saying is, we have a strategy. We're committed to this over the long term. We are going to need provincial and federal support in sending signals to industry like this is where we want to go. We are interested, for example, in addressing air quality for wood smoke, and one of the solutions is heat pumps. So we're going to have programs over the next X number of years, education and programs about people on the benefits of switching from wood to a heat pump or what have you. That gives industry a good signal that this is a good idea for me to train up people to do that. And I think they need to hear that signals from local governments, regional levels, province, and hopefully the federal level. So that clear signal is as clear as it can be, is good for industry. It's also very expensive for any given contractor to do marketing and promotions to people. If you, again, I come back to this again, but if regional and local governments have options, communications you're already doing, whether it be water bills or newsletters, to residents, and you're building that awareness, you're building the market demand, that really helps industry grow because it's expensive to market. So what they want is demand. They want the phone to be ringing. Someone calling and said, install some insulation. So if the local and regional government actors can help that phone ring, that's a great assistance to growing industry, and then they'll hire more. The more the phone rings, the more ready they are going to be to hire more people. So it's part of it's about building market demand and what's a practical role for local and regional governments to do there. Again, looking for other policy options. There's some listed there as well. Like, what are the policy and regulatory options that you can help move that is encouraging and motivating people to retrofit their homes? Again, it's also creating market demand, hopefully helping you also address some of your housing needs assessments in terms of helping people retrofit their basements for rental housing, for example, if that was one you were to choose. I'm not saying that's it, but I don't know the local context, but there's a way to create more rental housing and improve the efficiency of homes, so you can do both if that is a option to be discussed. So yeah, again, there's a range of different things that can be done, and many of them are listed. Some of them are listed within the strategy, need to be worked out further, and I think that's what staff is saying, they would like to explore some of these further to see which are the best. Some of them are much easier to do. For example, you can start with retrofit rebate promotions sooner with things quite quickly. A next newsletter, and others take more time, obviously. So our goal with this is start what you can start soon on something, on whatever can be started soon with, and then build on the things that take a little bit longer time. So you're moving into doing those things that are probably creating more permanence, creating more market demand.
Great. Thanks, Peter. You've given us a lot to think about here, and I'm so glad to hear that Elena and her staff will be working on developing it. We'll probably be speaking to you soon. Thanks.
Dr. Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is really a great report and great to see this coming forward. I'm putting on my my TV home improvement lens. If you've ever watched Homes by Homes or any of those shows, often there's a quote that happens at the beginning for a reno, and then Holmes gets in there, whoever, the Property Brothers or whoever gets in there, and there's lots of problems. So I guess I'm wondering with the whether it's outdated wiring or sometimes really bad situations. So I guess I'm wondering if there's anything built into the rebate programs for sort of assessments or feasibility inspections or anything like that before people even get started, to that there's funding for, because I think that adds to the affordability barrier if folks take this on even with a rebate, and then you get in there and there's a lot of problems, which increases the cost. Is there anything like that that's built in or has been considered?
I mean, there's definitely which isn't maybe exactly talking, there's definitely options for people to have like an energy evaluation, which looks at a home and tell us about, well, here's all your options in your home, for example, and what's your motivation here, and if someone is, I'm looking for the most cost-effective upgrade, then they can say, well, this is what it might be, and it would link to As previously noted, air sealing would be one of those. It's the most cost effective, then move up to insulation and so on. And also look some of the other options. There are rebates. Having to do electrical upgrades is very common. Many older homes need, lots of them need electrical upgrades regardless of whether they were going to a heat pump because they have, old and outdated electrical. And there are rebates available for that as well. So there is options for people to sort of upgrade their electrical panel and do that along with another type of upgrade. An energy evaluation gets you part of the way there. And the other, which there's different types of support that's being tested here in the capital region and potentially available in your region, is having more type of virtual calls where you're talking to people and it's for free, and you could sit down and say, well, here's all the things I'm wrestling with. I don't know which way to go. I've got these options or different costs, and then someone gives you, they're not trying to sell you anything, they're just trying to give you non-biased advice that says, well, let's talk about, why are you retrofitting? What are your needs? Like, if you're comfortable, tell them what your budget is, and then talk you through and say, well, let's talk about the options here. And then you're like, well, I'm really unsure about my wire. And then you basically talk, it helps you get to the next step, which would then say, it looks like you need to talk to ... this type of person first. Or, well, if you haven't thought about, sounds like your type age of home, you likely have uninsulated walls. Unless you've upgraded, you should have that looked first, because that's going to be the most cost-effective way to improve your efficiency of your home. You should probably start there, for example. So there are options to provide different types of support to people to sort of get over some of those barriers that you're talking about, where they're not sure whether they're moving ahead. We're testing one of them here, and then it's typically an hour with an energy expert, which is very, and right now it's being covered through this program and piloted. And these are things that are being looked at as like, is this useful for people to be able to have that time with someone? It's not trying to sell them a given product. And it has no stake except trying to, help you solve a problem. Those are options of things that could be implemented.
That's great. Thank you. That's helpful. Thanks.
Dr. Hillian.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all involved for the presentation. A timely presentation, as I'm in the process of retrofitting my windows right now. I'm not doing it myself. Working with windows is actually a total pain. That's a joke in case anybody didn't know. I did want to acknowledge, and I'm glad to hear about my rebates going up. That's a piece of good news. I did want to acknowledge that I switched from oil a number of years ago to natural gas. And the reason was precisely as you mentioned, I had an oil tank that needed to be replaced. And rather than spend the cost of replacing it, it made sense to switch. But I didn't do the math when you were presenting the numbers of people in our communities who are still using oil. I think you said 40, was that 40%?
Can you go back the slide? If not sure, we can go back to that slide here. I've got it. Hold on, I can go here as well. Got it. So this was just, the percentage share wasn't specifically tied to the number of people. That was the percentage of the GHG emission in your community. This is from the provincial greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and what they do is they use, it's an estimating modeling game. What they're doing is they're using actual data. So I don't have the exact number in front of me, but that's the percentage of greenhouse gas emission reductions within the community. It's 40% from oil. So it's a pretty large percentage, but that doesn't mean, it does not mean at all that 40% of the homes are. It's just that oil, again, is the most GHG intensive heating fuel.
Okay, so we don't know how many homes of the 770 per year that would represent.
We can provide you with an estimate of what we think that would be by saying, here's an average oil heated home, and we can do that math for you on that. So yeah, and that's we're going to the pie chart slide is where we're looking for here. One of the pie charts.
Those would seem to be the earliest targets, I would think. I would think there would be incentives either through insurance or otherwise. Are we talking to the insurance companies about this issue?
Well, the insurance companies right now, in many cases, have said oil tank leak is non-insurable. And one of the big things that I think the capital region's been trying to do is at least get that piece of information to people, because that's just a public awareness piece that says, wow, I'm not insurable. It's like, imagine not being insurable for a fire or something. It just seems inconceivable. when the potential cost of a leak could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So one of the things we're just trying to do is not just saying, so if you do have an oil tank, do all you can do to make sure, you're checking it regularly. You've got these people, there's things you can put under your oil tank to make sure if it leaks, you're going to catch it, it's not going to leak. At the minimum, do that if that's, and be really alert. I had a neighbor, and she was retired, but she was out there every day, nice cement underneath it. If that tank leaked, she was going to know. So, and she couldn't afford to upgrade it. But then the whole element is that there is incentives. Again, right now there's $6,000 incentives from going to oil to a heat pump.
I was thinking of maybe going a step further with the insurance agencies. I think the insurance industry as a whole has become much more aware of global warming in recent years. They're spending millions of dollars on repairing homes that have been burned in fires in response to floods, all those things. It strikes me that they would have an interest in climate action and might be prepared to offer incentives and lower insurance costs to people who retrofit their houses.
Yeah, it's definitely a good option to follow up. And other options, some local governments are moving towards regulating.
Well, that was actually my other question.
At least at time of replacement, because people still do install new oil tanks and oil furnaces. The City of Vancouver, for example, is going to be putting in a regulation about it. So I'm not saying that's their route, but it isn't an option.
What about all of those natural gas users like myself who've made relatively recent investments in natural gas furnaces and such? What sort of incentives do you see there? Because the financial one, as you've acknowledged, electricity is actually more expensive. So, I think I have a fairly highly developed conscience, but I also have to keep an eye on a pocketbook.
For sure. Well,
being an old age pensioner.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are options for. I'm not familiar with your home, obviously, but there are options for. I'm not sure if it's fully insulated, and there's other things you can do to reduce the amount of by making your home more efficient, so you're using less natural gas. So that's one option. The second is when at the point there are rebates from going from $6,000 rebate from going natural gas to a heat pump. So that is an option. Obviously, you recently invested, so that might not be there. So this is a conversation that happens between some of the people that talk about what are your options to reduce your greenhouse gas footprint of your home. And usually in all homes, any given home, there's options to do that. And now what's the right option? What's cost effective? What's appropriate for that? It's different depending on the home and the homeowner. But I think that's part of the message for everyone. There's options to improve the efficiency of their home and make them, better homes. And do you have any issues with your home that you're also trying to address, that you would want to invest in just to make your home a more comfortable, better home? There are all options for all homes.
Just one final question. For years, we've been talking about the possibility of municipal loans through the Municipal Finance Authority. It would seem that if both the federal and the provincial government are going to make low interest loans available to homeowners, that wouldn't be necessary. But I wonder if you know of any communities that have actually done that.
Well, the District of Saanich, as one of your colleagues was mentioning, is currently right now developing the PACE program, which is a property assessed clean energy financing program, which means the loan is tied to your property tax. Which means if you're planning, someone's planning on living and they're going to buy a heat pump, it costs 10 grand, but they're only planning on living there. They don't know, they might move. 2 years, 5 years, that means you pay off annually. And then when you sell your home, it's attached to your loan, and you can either buy it out at the point of sale as part of the negotiation, or it goes to the new owner. So that is one option that some local governments are exploring. Again, if the province now has a program, and if the federal government comes with a program, if those financing programs are good enough, then you might not need it. However, I think there is a specific market segment for sure that property assessed clean energy financing is right for. It's a good one for many people. So just like everything, people do different types of financing because they have different needs and wants. I think there's likely multiple different types of financing programs that will meet the various needs and wants of people in the CVRD. So I'd say this needs to be explored further in terms of what are the right types of financing that are available. And again, we have talk of different financing programs. There is one now, but a lot of talk is what we need programs actually in market and people participating in those programs. So we need, we almost need to have multiple being developed so we know there's multiple options in market.
Thanks very much.
Wow, that's a lot of information. But there's a lot of interest here at the board, as you can see. So thank you so much, Peter, for your presentation today.
Great, I'm happy to present. And as noted, if there's other types of presentations specifically focused on other things, I'm happy as part of this program, we can put those together. And if there's any members of that would have further questions, if you provide an email, I'm happy to answer those via email as well. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Great. I think we have one final thought from Director Frisch.
Well, it was a question for Peter, actually. I was just listening to what Director Grieve was asking about the PST, and it looks like those items are PST exempt currently. Are you aware of that, Peter? Weather stripping and
that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure on that. I believe they are, but I'm not 100% on that. I should know that actually, but I'm going to get back to you on that one.
Yeah, according to energyhub.org, they are, but anyways, I could be out of date. Thanks.
Okay, thanks again. And is there anyone opposed to receipt of the presentation? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried, and there was a recommendation. Thank you. And it's that we received it as information and that the board authorized staff to engage municipal staff to identify opportunities for coordination and report back on implementation actions through the 2021-2025 financial planning process. Any comments or questions on that recommendation? Okay, I'll go through the list. Director Grant, in favor. Director Swift, in favor. Director Muir, in favor. Director Grieve,
In favor.
thank you. Director Arbor,
In favor.
thank you. Director Frisch, in favor. Director Morin, in favor. Director Cole-Hamilton, in favor. And Director Hillian, in favor. That's unanimous. Thank you. So we're on to item 8, and it's the COVID-19 phase 1 after action report. Thank you. I'll pass it over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And tonight, Sybil Sanderson is online to provide her presentation on the after action report. Sybil is from Collaborative Consulting. She has lots of experience in emergency operations and emergency planning. She conducted this research for you and has presented her after action report. It's attached on the agenda. After her presentation, she'll help to answer any of your questions that you may have and go through the recommendations she's presented. Our recommendation is for the adoption either immediately or through the financial plan. And also just to note that Howie Siemens, our emergency planning manager, is here also to answer any of your questions. So we turn it over to Sybil.
All right, good evening. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to just share a little bit about this process that we went through. And I gather, I'm not sure if I can change the slides or if you need to.
We'll do it for you. Just
okay.
Give us a cue. Yeah.
All right. So if you want to go to the next slide, that'd be great. This is kind of what I'm going to cover here briefly, but I wanted to first of all really congratulate the Comox Valley and all of the municipalities that were involved in Comox First Nation. You did an awesome job, and so it was a real privilege for me to be able to go through and do the surveys and have the various chats with people and find out how things went. So lots and lots of good things here. I'm going to go through why COVID-19 is different. It's very far from what we're normally used to. But just an overview of the after action report, talk a little bit about the regional emergency program, their priority response goals, some of the successes that we had, some suggestions that have been provided for consideration, and some next steps. So if we can go to next slide. Okay. All right. So normally when we deal with emergencies, it's something that happens locally. It happens within our jurisdictions. And so first responders, or could be public works, are dealing with a situation. And And then they request that the EOC is activated to assist. And so we're there to support, and potentially there's recovery because there may have been damage to property or to homes, etc. COVID-19 was really different because it was worldwide, and really federally and provincially, the ministries were in charge of this event. So it was instead of being a bottom up kind of a situation, it was a top down. And so they were giving us directives, and then we were at the local level looking at how do we actually support that. Sometimes we think, oh, this was a real drag, but the reality is, folks, this particular pandemic actually provided us with some awesome opportunities. One of them being that it woke everybody up to saying, oh, we don't really have a business continuity plan. We don't really know what our essential service is and how we're going to proceed with that. So business continuity is now much more top of mind with everyone. So that's a really important benefit that we've actually received from this. So direction came to us from health, and it was our job to try to interpret and implement that. Recovery has not been recognized for this particular event, so we needed to carry on. Really great that the Comox Valley decided to do an after action review and report for this phase 1, because yes, we probably would have lost a lot of the good information, the great lessons learned that we've got through this. Next slide, please. All right, so just a quick little highlight. I'm not going to go through all of the information there. One of the things I did want to spend just a couple of minutes on is, because this is the regional board, just what is your role in this? So approval of recommendations is one thing. Supporting the emergency program, that's a really thing, and that's one of the things I wanted to just stress a little bit. Sometimes we get one-off situations, we deal with them, we fix them, and then we move on. When we're talking about emergency programs, it's not just about responding to something when it happens. It's about preparing. It's about the ongoing being prepared, learning together, doing exercises, doing training, and doing all those things to help build this process. And so that is something that needs some ongoing funding. And yes, I'm going to make a little bit of a plug for that, just because I know that sometimes, and it may not happen here in the Comox Valley, but I know I've seen it in other regions where, oh, it's a tough year, it's an election year, we want to cut the budget a little bit. Oh, let's take a little bit away from emergency planning. And what happens almost invariably is that right after that, you've got an emergency program that's scrambling to try and stay on top of things and continue with the projects that they were working on. And something happens and suddenly they become a priority again. So we're just going to encourage you to continue. I hear that you've been providing some really great support. Just going to encourage you, you're on the right track to keep doing that. So we did the phase 1 after action report, and some of the things that we had, some good successes, and we're just going to go through a few of those things. Just so you, the little image there, continuous improvement. That is actually the goal of emergency programs, is to always be looking at how do we improve. Okay, next slide. All right, so this was the first kind of event that was done, coordinated regionally, and it was a good test because it gave you a chance to see how does this work together, and collaboration at all levels. So it was collaboration on the policy group front from elected officials. There was also collaboration and coordination between the municipal staff and the regional staff and the First Nations staff, etc. It gave us a real opportunity to test that out, see how it works. A big thing that came through was that the consistent messaging to the public was really a good benefit. There were some neat collaboration teams or working groups that were developed between the regional districts and the municipal. One of the advantages that came out of that we may not have thought about was some of the smaller municipalities didn't have a lot of some of those more complex things in place, whether that's the financial, dealing with expenditure authorization forms, etc. And so having that collaboration happening between them meant that those that had experience could share that, and those that needed to learn things were able to learn that. So a really great advantage for being able to work together. One of the things that I also wanted to just quickly touch on, the Emergency Program Act provincially is being modernized. And one of the clear messages that they have given us so far is that regional emergency programs is going to be what they're looking for. They're looking for regional collaboration. So kudos to you. You're well on your way to that. Next slide. So my apologies, this is kind of small. Just wanted to highlight a couple of things here. So these are the British Columbia Emergency Management System priority response goals. Now these are numbered, and the reason why they're numbered is because it's actually the order of the priorities. So the number one thing that all of us need to be doing is ensuring the health and safety of the workers, the responders. So that was a really key thing that needed to happen and did happen in the Comox Valley. So that's great. When we're talking about saving lives in this particular case, saving lives was not a local government responsibility in this particular situation. It was a provincial. And so provincially, that's what they were doing, is they were giving us directives, telling us about isolating, washing hands, wearing masks, all those kinds of things. Those were all things designed to help save lives. Okay, so that was a provincial directive. Then reducing suffering. So there's a number of things, but definitely implementing public safety measures. So this is where things that were looked at is, do we open facilities? Do we close facilities? In a lot of cases, we closed facilities temporarily so that we could develop proper work safe strategies to be able to open again. Protecting public health. So again, that was more of a provincial perspective. Didn't really need to protect infrastructure. However, one of the things as local governments and at all levels actually was looking at what are our essential services. So even though a lot of us were isolating at home, the reality is we still needed to make sure that water, sewer, all those essential services are still being carried out. Okay. Protecting property. On the local level, we needed to look at, and it wasn't necessarily us, but maybe the business improvement districts or whatever, but looking at more security for the businesses that were closed, right? Protecting the environment. Well, actually, that was a real benefit of COVID, is because everybody was staying home for a long time. We actually reduced the greenhouse emissions, which was a real benefit. One of the things that was real challenge for COVID was reducing the economic and social losses. Okay, so one of the things I'm really going to encourage you folks to do is, if you know organizations that were depending on regular business, now's really the time for them to have figured out how can they continue to operate and be able to be ready. So even that when that second wave should come, that they're ready. And that as the municipalities and the regional district and the First Nation, that you're all ready to implement the measures that you need to, the increased measures to keep safe. Next slide, please. So some of the successes, obviously great collaboration and coordination, clear messaging to the public, which was really important. Again, business continuity. It rose to the surface and people said, oh, we need to have this. Great. This is some of the best news that a lot of us in emergency management have received, is that businesses are starting to take that seriously. And then identifying what are the essential services that we need to be doing at all levels. All right, next slide. Okay, so we're going into some of the things that are being recommended. So one of the things is, rather than waiting for something to happen and then saying, oh, shoot, we should have been trained, let's have some annual training. So I'm going to put a little plug in here, and I hope that you'll all take notice. Elected officials need annual training as well in emergency management. What's your role? Having some workshops. And after every local government election, Emergency Management BC actually puts on a they go to around the regions, and they actually do presentations and have discussions and opportunity for feedback and connecting with the Emergency Management BC staff. And I'm going to encourage you to make that a priority. So even if you've been once, things change. And so it's really important to make those connections, to attend those provincial workshops when they come around our regions, and then participate. When staff are providing workshops and trainings, please make the time for it, because this is actually really important. And there are times when, I mean, COVID was slow moving, but there are times when you're going to need to be part of a policy group, and it will be fast moving, and there will be really a crisis involved. So it's really important for us to make a priority for that. They're also going to be looking at some orientation packages just to help us understand what's the roles, what are we doing, a clear diagram of who is responsible. That was one of the things that was asked for, is who is responsible for what. And COVID really brought that to light, that there were a lot of things that actually weren't local government's responsibility. They were provincial responsibilities. They belonged to a particular ministry. They belonged to other organizations, etc. So having a good sense of who's responsible for what is going to be really helpful for you. And then strengthening information technology. That was another benefit that came out of COVID. There were lots of organizations that were slowly starting to move along with implementing information technology in ways where we can remotely do things. And so COVID actually forced us all to work faster, to become capable of doing remote work. And that's a real benefit. Next slide. So one of the things that was raised at various levels, and particularly around the pandemic, is these community groups. So Coalition to End Homelessness, Salvation Army, the food banks, soup kitchens, etc. One of the things I just wanted to help you understand is that the EOC and the local authorities aren't the ones that are responsible for these. But one thing that did come out is, and actually on March 18th of 2020, the provincial health officer put out a letter to all of these community groups, emphasizing to them that, one, they are an essential service, and two, encouraging them to do everything they could to help them understand what is there, how can they continue to offer their services to the vulnerable populations using the safety measures that have been identified by WorkSafe BC. So, you know, if you're on their board, if you have input into them, this is a really important piece for them, because it comes back to that business continuity concept. They were not ready to continue business. So now we had a bit of a lull. I hope that they've done some things and put some safety measures in place so that they can continue to do that, because that is their role, that they do have that vulnerable population that they are serving. And as an essential service, they need to do that. And there's been some grant funding that was made available to them through the United Way, etc. So encourage them to take that funding and use it to help them be prepared. Okay. Next slide. So one of the things I have recommended is a joint policy group with mayor's chair, electoral areas chair, and the Comox First Nation chief. One of the challenges that was not just mentioned by staff, but was also mentioned by some of the directors was the challenge of who's in the policy group, how are we sharing information with each other? So I'm going to encourage you to consider in the future looking at trying to have one policy group. Now, that doesn't mean that these people make all the decisions and that the rest of them are left out. So that's not the case at all. The policy group is supposed to be a small group of decision makers for policy and strategic decisions. And that's a really key thing to try and wrap our brains around. So most of the time, you need to be sort of at the 20,000 foot level so that you're not getting caught up in what specifically the EOC is doing, but that you are hearing from your community groups, etc. If there's issues that are raised, you bring those to the attention of your CAO. Your CAO identifies what needs to go to the EOC, but a lot of the decisions should be made at the ground, whereas you're more around policy. So what is it that you want to accomplish as a region? And so one of the things you want to look at is, for example, you did some strategic planning. That's a really important thing because that'll help you to identify, and you've identified that homelessness is one of the strategies, one of the important things. So sticking at that strategic level and allowing how are we going to do this in the moment when we are dealing with an emergency or disaster really needs to be kind of at the EOC and at the organizational level. Okay. All right, next slide. All right, so some of the next steps, one of the things that I was asked to provide is kind of what could we do fairly soon so that should we get that second wave of COVID that we're ready. So asking you to consider establishing a joint policy group. Key thing here, the policy group is all of the representation like we talked about, but really, really critical is that all the information still needs to go to your consuls, to the rest of the board. Any kind of things that are being implemented, that are being recommended by the EOC need to actually go to all the staff at all of the municipalities, at the board, at the regional district, etc., and at the First Nation, because if nobody's in the loop, they're not going to be able to implement. So really important to understand that communication goes through and through, but then you're in terms of having a smaller group that can make those policy type decisions, always with feedback and information from the rest of your council and so on. One of the things we recommended is having the EOC participants connect a little before we think we're going to really ramp up again, so that we can pre-plan and we can remember all the great lessons learned that we had, make sure everything's implemented. Also, one of the things we may want to look at even beforehand, now that we kind of know how COVID works, is that should our communities be directly impacted again, we already know what the federal and provincial directives are likely to be. So what can we do? How can we encourage our local government, our local businesses, etc., to work towards that? And then the other thing, really important, folks, I hope you all have your own grab and go kit. I hope you all have done emergency preparedness for your homes, for your families, and then promote that out there in the communities, because you are leaders and leaders need to be doing what they're suggesting everybody else does. All right, and next slide, so can take questions.
Are there any questions? Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. One of the things I've never understood is that if there's a massive disaster, and I think of like the wildfires up in the interior the last few summers where lots of people ended up being burned out of their homes, public buildings were opened up as reception centers and people slept in them overnight. And as far as I know, it's the emergency operations centers that established those services. I'm assuming if an earthquake happened here and you know, my home collapsed, that I'd be able to sleep in the local rec center on a bunk if I couldn't find a hotel or something. So I'm not sure why that isn't a responsibility in general in relation to people who don't actually have a home. Because, and I guess what I'm responding to is a part of the presentation where you talked about the fact that all those various services like the Homeless Coalition, Salvation Army and such, they're kind of off to the side. It's important what they do, but they're not really part of this emergency response. So maybe you can help me understand that. It seems like a contradiction.
Okay, sorry, I probably didn't express that correctly. They are part of the response, but they would be part of the response just like the first responders. So if it was a fire situation, right? So we wouldn't be telling the firefighters what to do, but we would be supporting them. And they would be providing information into the Emergency Operations Center through the operations section, and then we would be trying to support them. The same thing happens with emergency support services. So if they've set up reception centers or group lodgings, then they are a site and we in the EOC are supporting that. Okay, so these community groups that, as you mentioned, that are providing these services to the vulnerable populations, they are part of this as well. And that's one of the things that I'm recommending is that they be taken seriously and being considered as sites where they are dealing with things on the ground. That's where they're doing their work. And one of the jobs of the EOC is to support them. I just think we need to be careful in terms of what that support looks like. And some of that is going to look more like, by the way, here's the grant opportunities. Here's where you can get the information from WorkSafe as to what your safety measures need to be, etc., rather than trying to do the job for them. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, I think that's a little more clear. I just think it was a major gap in our response this time around, because I don't know how many times on our calls with the EOC, and through no fault of any local people, the question of how we provide services to the vulnerable population simply couldn't be answered because there was no provincial strategy or resources forthcoming to respond to the needs being expressed by those various agencies. But thanks for highlighting that that's an issue we need to fix.
Director Hamir.
Thank you. And my question is going to be something quite similar. I'm wondering if you or perhaps Howie could explain what an incident site, like an incident site reporting, what does that look like? Because as Director Hillian said, if we're going to center some of these organizations, what are we expecting from them as an incident site?
Do you want me to answer that, Howie?
No, I'll take that. I think I have to go back, Director Hillian's question to Sybil. This COVID event there was no support as in normal, right? So the ESS or the support services that normally would activate if it was our own would have been there to do that. That's the key we have to keep remembering because of COVID. What happens usually in that situation is we'll open up group lodging facilities to help evacuate people in communities that have been affected. That's also a first stage of recovery, which wasn't part of the COVID event. It wasn't recognized for the province. They didn't say we're gonna move into recovery. The communication links that we want to see maybe if we continue through COVID is having liaisons working with those groups, probably through the coalition, because they do represent the most. But the key piece that we need as a part of that site, that group of people that come together, is representatives from the people who can make the power of decision, which are BC Housing, the Ministry of Affairs and Housing, Health itself, because we can sit there all we want as representatives from the EOC. We have no powers of action. So that would be the site as a group of people coming together as a committee to have those conversations, two-way conversations, right? So that we take information back, but also give information of where we struggle with trying to have some directives at the EOC level.
Yeah, no, I totally acknowledge that. I think my one feedback, and to both you and to Sybil, I think one of the issues that we saw specific to COVID was many of these organizations, food bank and soup kitchens, are staffed by volunteers, and most of those volunteers are seniors who were, exceptionally at risk for this in this event. And I think that's going to be an ongoing struggle. So I don't know how I don't think there was any funding that was specific to supporting these groups to encourage younger volunteers or to support those seniors in the positions that they were already in. I think that's one of the reasons the food bank did shut down so quickly, is that many of their volunteers just did not feel comfortable and safe to open because of their age. So Sybil, I don't know if that's something that you can take back to or move up a food chain. It's the age of the volunteers in this sector. I mean, it's not, I'm saying I totally support bringing more community groups in, but there's a vulnerability there in capacity and the ability for them to stay open. If we're depending on them to feed the homeless and to feed those vulnerable populations, we need to acknowledge that huge vulnerability and that we may need to step in. And if we do, as Howie said, where did those resources come from? So I just wanted to point that out. Question to Howie about the physical site here on Harmston, because I noticed the one recommendation about using the site as the physical facility. I'm wondering if there were issues during during phase 1 of using this room. Was it because fairly new to the room? Was it being used in the way that was intended, or were there issues with having us meet here and having it as an EOC?
Yes to all that.
Okay.
Yeah, so COVID, obviously we had to look at setting up a facility that could run. This was a brand new building that had not really completed its sort of test run, especially the EOC component of that. So we really were going to struggle trying to, if we bring people into the space to work in an environment that we haven't tested and practiced in. What a positive that came out of this event, and Sybil did touch on this, is that we really have moved leaps and bounds in our technology and achieving a new look for the EOC, where we can now work probably across a wall from each other, and you guys could be over here, where we could still have the function of an EOC on the other side. Because as long as we have that technology, we can have as large of EOC we want, with virtual representatives that might be at the city or at their desk in the other part of the building. So we've learned a lot, and at that start it was a lot of restriction based on the unknowns, and just staff trying to be safe by staying home. Sure. Right? That was our first priority as the BSRM's goal, is we don't want to be all in the same room because we want to protect each other, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, if the situation allows, like obviously in a situation where we have a major earthquake and our communication lines are down, I'm wondering if we as a board should automatically switch to online meetings to enable you to use this room more effectively without having to, infringe on putting up the wall or whatever happens. Because I see the space requiring, especially in COVID, the spacing, but even with the walls up, that's a really small room on that side. And I don't see how we're going to get around bumping into each other. I think we as a board figured out how to function quite efficiently on Zoom. And so it's maybe something that we want to consider to not constrain the EOC for us to move online as well, and then have this room as flexible as you need it to be.
I appreciate that input. We are just doing that workout right now of ramping up potentially for a second wave. And we were in here actually this morning doing some spacing, and we would, to actually have 20 people working in here, we would need this whole room. With that side set up is more of the IT side with all the laptops and stuff. So that is, yeah, I think that would be our recommendation. We just want to, on October 15th, hopefully we'll have our training before we have to ramp up, we'll test out with actually participants in the room who are going to be moving around, and we'll see if those numbers are going to be safe enough. And then once that's the case, we'll probably recommend to Russell that if we do open the EOC, we'll have to open up with both walls, or the wall open, both sides.
Thank you. Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've learned a lot that hopefully will prepare us for the next time round for sure. And I think, as we mentioned last time you were here, you know, we're taking the brunt of what should be many things that should be provincial responsibility, et cetera. I guess I wrote down a couple questions. What happens when the body responsible for vulnerable folks are not doing their job or providing funding, because we get the calls and the emails. You know, I had someone say, you know, my brother's homeless and he got himself arrested the other night so that he could be away from people and try to be safe, purposely lit a fire or did whatever to get somewhere, so that, because he was worried about COVID. So, you know, what do we do? Like, how do we communicate our limited mandate to the community without a backlash in terms of having these calls from individuals or organizations who feel that we should be stepping up? And, you know, opening showers and bathrooms. And at one point, I think the community garden in Courtney was the only source of fresh water for washing hands, et cetera. So I guess I'm wondering what the suggestion would be to get better coordination for next time from the province, so that we're not getting all of our people who are doing such an amazing job and did an amazing job through this and stepped up. We shouldn't be taking, you know, having to carry the load, but this is our community and these are our friends and family, neighbors. And of course, we're going to do what we can, even though it's not technically within our mandate. So that's my main question. And I wanted to respond to Director Hamir in terms of the volunteer aspect. It got me thinking, you know, Ministry of Education, we had a whole bunch of young students who were low risk for spreading COVID and contracting it. You know, maybe there could be some grad credits or something in there for them to get involved with some of these organizations to help out. So I think thinking outside the box in those ways is really necessary. So I don't know if you have any ideas around that, how we can you know, really drive this home to the province that we need resources for the next wave. Thanks.
Madam Chair, maybe to answer the question, I think you as a board and the city councils and village and districts and town are doing the best they can in terms of, you have elevated to the province the needs in subsequent pandemics for resources. Those were debated at UBCM and supported, and there were other municipalities that brought forward. So I think the experience that you had in the Comox Valley and across the province has done a great service to inform the province as to what the resources are and what the responsibilities are. Director Hillian said it previously, the need for the province to step up to manage many of our population that are presently underserved. So that's the first and foremost. Secondly, it's considering the recommendations brought forward by Sybil here to improve our own ability and learning from this experience so that we can better prepare ourselves. And I think we learned, and I'm hearing loud and clear, that key messaging in terms of helping to support you, because during these times, pandemics, major emergencies or otherwise, unfortunately, not everybody is served with all of their needs, and you will always hear criticism and the need for a response. So whatever we can do to better prepare you for that. I think by the province stepping up and by us being better prepared, more people will be served better in these emergencies. But sometimes there will be times where not all the needs are met, and we will better prepare you with better communications as to how to help bring those issues forward to us for our knowledge and understanding, and for you to help and present support for those community members that need it during those times.
Yeah, and Sybil, you had mentioned training for elected officials, and I did actually do training in my first term as a councillor, and unfortunately, I didn't find it very helpful with this particular emergency, because most of the training was simply, as an elected official, get out of the way and let and let the emergency response people do their job. You know, you set a budget for them and basically get out of the way. Have your own emergency preparedness kit for your family. That's basically what the training before was. And so I hope that future training will incorporate all this feedback that they're getting now, and so that we get better training as elected officials. Because if we are going to continue with the policy group that you had mentioned, I think it's really tough to maintain that 20,000 foot view that you're talking about, because each of the governments still has all of their same powers that they need to carry out the day-to-day operations of each of their municipalities and regions. So I think that was really hard for us, the mayors and myself, to separate the day-to-day decisions and try and keep it at a really high policy level, because we each had to take back to our respective boards and councils really on the ground decisions that had to be made. So I'm just not sure how to in the future keep our policy group at that high level in the case of a health emergency, because, like, as I said, the emergency response people don't take over for the decision-making power. So we are left having to do sort of the nitty-gritty stuff. So do you have any advice for how to not be involved at that level and keep it high level for the policy group?
Maybe not specifically, but I guess one of the things I'd like to say is, especially when you're smaller municipalities, you're going to be much more involved than you might be in other situations. But I guess one of the things that you really want to take a look at is, particularly around the vulnerable populations, which I know was a big deal, is what are these organizations doing? I mean, they've been through the first wave of COVID. Have they now got some things in place? Have they put up some shields? Or because there was quite a bit of funding available through United Way that they could apply for, and I don't know if they actually did that, but that could be a way that you could help them to help themselves, basically. And some of the things that may need to get looked at is, if their facilities are not large enough for safety, is there a place where they could do it outside? Is there with some shelter? Is there a recreation facility that could maybe provide that space, a bigger space for doing this? So I think there are ways, but I think we need to sort of be planning ahead. and trying to help them to identify what kind of solutions might work for them. And then looking at it from your perspective, how do we support that?
Thank you. Director Hamir?
Yeah, thank you. And Sybil, I just wanted to comment too on the last point in your last slide about emergency preparedness. And it's something that I feel really strongly about. And I guess it's a question to Howie. I didn't see that as one of the recommendations in here. I know it's going to require some budget. And so wondering if that might be coming to budget separately, maybe not embedded in this, but I'm hoping to see a funding request to up the amount of emergency preparedness in the community.
And Director Mary, yeah, so this report was kind of drafted prior to our strategic planning component that I was allowed to attend and appreciated that. It will be coming into a form of the budget. It will be focusing at enhancing or actually revamping and improving the neighborhood emergency program, which I had already shared with all you at the last meeting, that the province has pulled funding on, and that it's left with the local governments to try to revamp those programs. So will be a line item in there is to increase that, to do that. So
thanks.
Okay, I see no further questions. So thank you, Sybil, for your presentation, fielding all our questions. And is there anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing and hearing none, that's carried. Thank you. And the recommendation is to endorse the findings of phase 1 and that we further the no net financial impact ones, or the financial impact ones, to the financial planning process. Is any discussion? Okay, I'll go through the list. Director Grant. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is a vote of only the areas. Director Arbor.
In favor.
Director Grieve.
In favor.
And Director Hamir. In favor. And that's carried. Thank you very much. And we're on to item 9. Thank you. This is the infrastructure grant for the Comox Valley Sports Center mezzanine upgrade.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Susan Bullock is here, our Manager of Recreational Programs, to present her report and answer any of your questions.
Through the chair to the directors. Do you want me to? I can go here. Got you. Thanks for having me here again today. So recently the Commission received a presentation on a grant opportunity with Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. The grant will be used to retrofit the Comox Valley Sports Center mezzanine area. The plan is to convert the largely pretty much concrete box into 3 to 4 smaller comfortable spaces that would be appropriate for fitness and other activities, and as well as using for meeting rooms. It would include accessible washrooms, sports flooring, HVAC, and acoustic improvements. The financial information. The proposed budget for the project is $446,000, and the CVRD's portion is $119,000. The source of the funding would be from the Comox Valley Recreation Complex's capital reserves, and the project would be expected to be started and completed in 2021. And then just the recommendation from the.
Okay. Are there any questions? Director Arbor.
Thank you. I just want to thank staff for bringing this forward. There's lots of initiatives at the Sports Commission, it seems. So it's good, I think, for the public to know that we continue to invest in the future of our rec facilities and make improvements that that will actually help us weather things like pandemics and diversify our program offers. So thanks so much for applying for this grant.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, are we all in favor of receipt? Okay, that's carried and there's a recommendation. Okay, and that's that the board support the grant application. Any discussion? Director Arbor, is your hand up from before?
Yeah, sorry, but I can vote in favor.
Okay, so we'll go through the list. Director Grant, in favor. Director Swift, in favor. Director Hamir, in favor. Director Grieve,
In favor.
thank you. Director Arbor,
In favor.
Director Frisch, in favor. Director Morin, in favor. Director Cole Hamilton, in favor, and Director Hillian. That's unanimous. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we're on to item 10. It's the property acquisition policy. Thank you.
And Madam Chair and Directors, Jake Martins is here to explain this proposed policy and answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Russell, and through the chair to the directors. It's a long walk over here from that corner of the room. So before you is a proposed policy respecting the acquisition of property, and this report comes to you in follow-up to a few recent experiences that we have had with respect to acquiring property. The board did provide direction back in November 2019 to bring this forward, and so it is here before you. The policy provides guidelines respecting a number of aspects of the process, including an initial briefing of the CAO to secure support, the completion of due diligence, including pre-screening and market value appraisals, the board approval process, and confirmation of the various roles and responsibilities for staff. Just highlight that, of course, this process is mainly to direct staff to provide a consistent and equitable approach. It does not change the fundamental role of the board in approving the acquisition of any properties. And with that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you. Director Grant.
Yeah, Jake, I don't know, in our community, we have a parks acquisition fund and it's DCC eligible. Would property acquisition be DCC eligible? I know we have to give a list, and if it's on the list, then we can buy it. We can actually do it without, but it's a little harder process. Just wondering how we're going to fund all this.
Yeah, so this policy doesn't consider, I guess, DCCs. It does provide for any acquisition associated with any services we provide. So certainly park services is one of them. It would fall within this policy, but it doesn't contemplate, I guess, how we would treat DCCs.
And each one of our services through the commissions or committees that manage it would be responsible for developing a strategy for acquisition. If, for instance, the sewer system saw the need for a property acquisition, it could be considered in their DCC bylaw that includes any other infrastructure required for those services. And with respect to parks, the only active parks acquisition we have is through the Community Park Service, for which there is a reserve in place, and there's a property tax that provides monies or funds on an annual basis towards that purpose.
Director Arbor, was your hand up from before, or do you have a question?
No, I have a question or comment.
ahead.
There was just one thing in the policy that I found that it brought the elected officials fairly late to a process of acquisition. So it stipulates that staff could actually essentially start some serious discussion with property owners before elected officials being involved. I would like to see if we could make a small adjustment so that the chair be kept in the loop at the same rate as the CAO, so that at least there's some elected representative that is tracking the issue before it firms up or becomes potentially bigger before it hits the board table. Thanks for comments from staff on that suggestion or from other elected officials.
Yeah, and through the chair to the directors. So yeah, point taken, I suppose. Item 6 of the policy, or clause 6, does provide that as soon as practical, the staff report will be presented to the appropriate board, committee, or commission. So Prior to that, there would be a conversation with the CAO, a briefing to secure support of the CAO, and that would allow then also a conversation with the chair of the board if the CAO felt an update or a conversation was necessary. So yeah, I guess the intention here is that as soon as practical, we're coming to the appropriate body to inform them and gain support to advance this process.
Yes, thank you. If I'm, oh, sorry, was Russell going to speak?
Yeah, sorry. And I was also going to add too that it's up to the CAO to ensure that any staff member contemplating a acquisition is doing so because there's a policy or a need that's been identified by the board, either through for instance, a park acquisition strategy or through a work plan, financial plan initiative or something of the like. So the CAO is there kind of as the gatekeeper to ensure that any negotiations on the basis of something that the board has given their minds to previously.
No, that sounds good. If I may just speak one last point is, yes, I do agree with all that. It's just, I would love an explicit mention either in 4 or 5 that there's actually a process for the chair to be debrief. Because right now I know that our meetings sometimes may not be timely. You know, if we have sometimes it's a matter of days, not a matter of weeks when you need to consider those matters. So I would just appreciate that as a small amendment if it's supported by others and the staff as well.
Thank you. Director Hillian?
Thanks, Chair. No issues with the policy. I did want to reference the second bullet in the executive summary where it says the CVRD does not currently possess a dedicated service or personnel responsible for the acquisition and disposition of real estate assets. And I'm just wondering if staff could comment on to what extent we have the expertise in other departments that is needed for that function. Or if we're at some deficit in terms of lacking dedicated personnel who have real estate expertise.
Thank you very much for the question. I don't see a deficit at this time. I also see a broad spectrum of experience across our organization from the past. Many organizations who are doing multiple acquisitions on a regular basis would build and have a specified staff resources for that, but we're not at that point, given the number of acquisitions or otherwise that we require. Sometimes on infrastructure where a right-of-way is required or something where properties are being negotiated across a number of properties, we'll use the expertise of a land negotiator or also typically the board has required appraisals, so we will hire a consultant or a professional that has the ability to undertake an appraisal where it's required by our board or one of our commissions.
Thanks, helpful to know.
So going back to Director Arbor's comments, is it possible to amend item 4 under policy? Prior to initiating an acquisition of any property, the Chief Administrative Officer and Chair shall be briefed?
Yes, and Jake's made a note of that to include that. If you adopt it, this will be included in it.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, are we on receipt? Yeah, is there anyone opposed to receipt? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried, and there's a recommendation. Thank you. And that the property acquisition policy as attached to staff report dated September 23rd be approved, and that's as amended now. And it's a vote of the full board. So Director Grant? In favor. Director Swift? In favor. Director Hamir? In favor. Director Grieve?
In favor.
Thank you. Director Arbor?
In favor.
Thank you. Director Frisch? In favor. Director Morin? In favor. Director Cole-Hamilton? In favor. Director Hillian? In favor, and that's unanimous. Thank you. We're on to item 11, Union Bay Improvement District Conversion Study Update. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and James Warren will provide a brief update. This is just for your information purposes, and our role in this has been supported both by James Warren and by Director Arbor as the Union Bay Improvement District is within his electoral area.
Thank you.
Thanks, Russell, and through the through the chair and to the board. So I think we've updated the board a couple of times on the improvement district conversion study, and we're now at a point where we have a draft report presented by Urban Systems, our consultant that we're working with. They have engaged with a number of stakeholders around this conversion study, and they've come up with findings in regards to the governance matters, the state of the infrastructure, and some considerations moving forward. Our next steps in the process are to conduct 2 information sessions, one in person and one virtual. Those will happen in the next couple of weeks in October. And then based on the findings and conversation from those information sessions, the draft report will be finalized, and the Union Bay Improvement District will move to hold a referendum on November 28th. Following that referendum to convert their services to the regional district or not, we then move forward. If the conversion does occur, we'd be looking for a conversion date in the new year. It wouldn't happen on January 1st. It would happen likely further into the year to enable some transition time. So, Madam Chair, happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I think Director Arbour has a question.
Yeah, comment and question. So yeah, I want to thank James for his staff leadership on this file the last few months. It's been an interesting one, especially because of COVID, and Union Bay Improvement District went through an election, an AGM, and working with our consultants. I think everybody has really put their best foot forward, everybody that's been involved in the process. So that's been good to see. And I guess this would come back to the board for consideration should there be a vote in the favor of the CVRD option. I did have a question for James. Since we released the report to the community, have we, as the CVRD staff or otherwise, receive a little bit or a lot or just normal feedback from the community on this, or?
Thanks, Director Robert. There's been very little feedback received from the community. We've updated our website. The materials are available online. I understand that the Union Bay Improvement District has submitted our newsletter number 3 with their utility bills most recently, and so we haven't received any particular feedback. The UBID itself, I think they have a regular dialogue with residents down there, but I haven't heard of any extreme feedback one way or the other.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to those couple of meetings in October.
And just a question is how we're advertising the meetings?
So the meetings are, again, using the UBID channels, their utility bills. We're also taking out newspaper ads, and they'll be in the newspaper the 2 weeks prior to the event, and then online, of course, our website, and I believe promoting it through Facebook as well.
Great, thank you. So I don't see any further questions. Is there anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing and hearing none, that's carried. And there is there a recommendation? No, a recommendation. That's all. So we're on to bylaws and resolutions. And the first one is bylaw number 622, the water conservation bylaw. Thank you. And this is a vote of the areas. So Director Arbour.
In favor. I think Courtney and Comox also vote.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Thanks for the correction. So it's just Cumberland that doesn't vote on this one. So Director Grant. In favor. Director Swift. In favor. Director Hamir. In favor. Director Grieve.
In favor.
Thank you. Director Arbour.
In favor.
Thank you. Director Frisch. In favor. Director Morin. In favor. Director Cole-Hamilton. In favor. Director Hillian. In favor. That's unanimous. Thank you. We're on to item 2, which is bylaw 623, the municipal ticket information bylaw. Thank you. And this is for a vote of all. So I will go through the list. Director Grant. In favor. Director Swift. In favor. Director Hamir. In favor. Director Grieve.
In favor.
Thank you. Director Arbour.
In favor.
Thank you. Director Frisch. In favor. Director Morin. In favor, Director Cole Hamilton. In favor, and Director Hillian. In favor, and that's unanimous. Thank you. And we will move into in camera.